Well, we begin this news hour with all the latest developments from Niger, where the military junta has now suspended the constitution and dissolved all state institutions. It comes hours after the head of the presidential guard named himself the leader of a transitional government after Wednesday's coup. Abdourahmane Tchiani made that announcement on state-run television, saying the intervention was necessary to avoid the demise of Niger. Tchiani did not mention a timeline for a return to civilian leadership.
Le mercredi 26 juillet 2023.
On Wednesday, security forces gathered within the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland to put an end to the regime of the Seventh Republic. Our action is motivated by the sole desire to preserve our beloved homeland. On the one hand, in the face of our deterioration of the security situation of our country, the president caused this crisis with poor economic and social governance.
Well, the coup has triggered a wave of both regional and international condemnation. French President Emmanuel Macron says he would support sanctions against Niger's military leaders.
First of all, I'd like to make it absolutely clear that France condemns in the strongest possible terms this military coup d'etat against a courageous, democratically elected leader who's carrying out the reforms and investments his country needs, and whom we support as we did his predecessor from the outset. This coup d'etat is totally illegitimate and deeply dangerous for the people of Niger, for Niger itself, and for the whole region.
Well, let's bring in Ahmed Idris, our correspondent, who is following developments for us from Abuja in neighbouring Nigeria. Ahmed, tell us a little more about General Tchiani.
General Tchiani has been the head of the Presidential Guards for a very long time. He occupied that office since 2015 when he was appointed by former President Mohamed, who is a close ally. The same person who he sort of rejected when he tried to mediate to end the crisis on the first day when the coup was announced. Now, Tchiani has been in charge of that the Presidential Guards for a very long time, 8 years now, going to the 9th year, and is rumored to be one of the strongest military personnel in the Nigerian army. He hails from Tilaberi area, and is considered by most of his seniors and, of course, colleagues as a very strict and straightforward gentleman. However, his intervention into the crisis underscores the division within the army. First of all, we've seen how the rest of the army responded to the coup, the initial statement of the coup, that they will crush the rebellion unless General Tchiani and his men gave themselves up and released President Mohamed Bazoum. But eventually, that army, as we later learn, sort of fell in line and supported General Tchiani. It's not clear whether this will continue because there are some divisions within the army in Niger.
Very interesting. Well, we have also heard multiple international calls for President Bazoum's release. Do we know what's happened to him and his family right now?
Bazoum is still being held by the military. Initially, for the first 2 days, we understand that he was kept at the presidential palace. But now with Tchiani assuming the role of president or leader of the country, it's expected that Bazoum will be moved to another location, probably within a military barracks, where he can be securely protected, or rather, he'll be securely held in case negotiations will follow later. Usually, when you look at coups in Africa, West Africa, and the Sahel especially, in recent times, most of the leaders who are deposed by the military were held as bargaining chips. If you go by the reaction of the international community, international organizations like the African Union, ECOWAS, the United States, the United Nations, tough words from these individuals, tough words from these countries. However, what we really see towards the end is a negotiated settlement to extract the leader from the hands of the military. We've seen that in Guinea, we've seen that in Mali, and of course, Burkina Faso. A lot of people believe that Bazoum is being kept as a bargaining chip.
Very interesting. Ahmed Idris there with all the latest for us, following this for us from Abuja. Thank you, Ahmed. Well, as Ahmed alluded to there, Niger is an important ally of both the West, as well as being a hub for French military operations in the Sahel. The border region of Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger is largely controlled by armed groups, among them Al-Qaeda and ISIL. After Mali and Burkina Faso expelled French forces from their territories, Niger then became the new focus of Western forces. France and the US have air bases there and thousands of soldiers in Niger. Belgium, Italy, and several other EU nations, as well as Canada, also have a military presence. And there are 200 police personnel from several EU countries. Well, let's bring in Daniel Eizenga. He's a research fellow at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. He joins us now from Washington, D.C. Daniel, what implications does this now have for the foreign boots on the ground there?
Well, I think it's an incredibly complicated situation for all of Niger's foreign partners. Anytime that you have a coup like this, an unconstitutional change in power, it draws up all kinds of legal problems for particularly Western security partners, and that many of them have laws on the books that prevent them from working with military governments. And so given the degree of security cooperation by France, by the United States, and by other regional partners, all of that has been called into question. I think that it's also incredibly important that those security partners continue to condemn this coup, as it is it's an unconstitutional seizure of power. It's illegal, and so they need to stand by the commitments that they've made to the popularly elected civilian president, Mohamed Bazoum.
Still, though, Daniel, there are lots of vested interests. As we were just saying, Niger hosts the French operations for the Sahel. We've heard international condemnation from Paris and from other places too. What is the strategy now? I mean, the West has to decide between working with the military in order to try to maintain security in that region or pushing for Bazoum to be reinstated. Neither of them seem like particularly good options.
Yes, well, I mean, I think it's still a very fluid situation. You know, there's an interest on the part of the junta that's taken power, on the part of General Tchiani, to present it as though they have broad, widespread support within the armed forces and that they're in control of the situation. And certainly they have been able to control the communications side of things these last 36 hours or so. But the truth is that they really have relatively little leverage, right? They are holding President Bazoum, as your correspondent mentioned earlier, and he does present something of a bargaining chip, but President Bazoum has refused to resign. And really, he shouldn't resign. I think that what we need to do, what the Nigerian people need to look at now are really what are their options for resolving this constitutional crisis. And so long as the international community, including Niger's regional partners in West Africa, continue to deprive the junta of the recognition that it needs, it'll be unable to really govern into the future.
Daniel, I'm curious about this because you're saying that the military says, or certainly wants to portray, that they are very much in control, that Niger is a huge country. We know there are enormous swathes that are unpoliced, and there are so many different armed actors here. The coup leaders have said that they're doing this partly for security, right? What is their plan?
It's not clear at all. And it really should be noted that while these coup leaders are justifying their actions based on security, that actually in Niger, the security situation had been relatively improving. It doesn't mean that there weren't security threats. There certainly are. But if you look at Niger in comparison to its neighbors, Mali and Burkina Faso, two countries where there is a military junta in power, Niger is doing much better. In fact, the degree of violence in Niger compared to Mali and Burkina Faso represents only about 10% of the violent events in the larger region. And so Niger really has performed a lot better on the security side. And so there really isn't a security justification for this junta, just like there isn't an economic one either. Niger had been improving its economic situation largely over the last 10 years under civilian rule. And so it seems much more likely that what's at play here are egotistical ambitions on the part of a few officers within the armed forces who have been able to figure out a way to take control away. And so I hope that the regional community continues to deprive them of that recognition that they need.
Daniel, if this is being driven by individual personalities and ambitions, there are obviously other powerful countries with interests here. Russia's Wagner fighters have been active in the region, we know. Might they now find a foothold with this new leadership?
I can't speak to any clear indications of that happening. I mean, it's certainly the case that wherever they have an opportunity or a window of opportunity open, that Wagner mercenaries have been eager to try and expand their influence in West Africa. And they have found ample opportunities in Mali and Burkina Faso. I suspect that we'll see similar kinds of disinformation campaigns in Niger now. And it's something that we need to be paying very careful attention to. We need the facts from the ground as opposed to the rhetoric of anti-French imperialism and Russia as some sort of security partner and savior. Russian mercenaries in Mali have not acted in the interests of Malian citizens. They've acted as regime security for the junta in power there. In fact, of all the events that Wagner has been involved in Mali, it's predominantly civilians. 4 out of 5 fatalities associated with Wagner mercenaries are actually civilians that have been killed, not militant Islamists. And so hopefully Niger will see the writing on the wall and recognize that that is not a path that leads to greater security. It's a path that leads to greater instability and a worsening overall situation.
Daniel Eizenga there, Research Fellow at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. Thanks so much for joining us on Al Jazeera, Daniel. Really great to get your insights.